20 years. So
Yeah.
we don't know where that's headed, but God will be good. All right. And Jim, I still can't help but be jealous that you're on the Isle of Mull. That's, I swear.
Yeah. We visited Castle Duart today, which is the seat of the MacLean clan.
Okay.
Or the MacLeans, as you would call them in America.
Mm-hmm. And how far is that from where you are in Dundee?
About 3 hours.
Okay. Very
plus
good.
a ferry trip.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right. All right. Well, I think we're about ready to go in just a second. Kate will let us know when we're going live. Oh, she's writing something. Okay, well, we just got the indication that we're live here, and I'd just like to take the opportunity to welcome everybody joining in on our Parenting Teen live stream. We want to thank Christian Focus Publications for putting this together. And so I just want to welcome everyone who's here on the live stream with us, whether on Facebook Live or YouTube or through Christian Focus's streaming website. So we're just going to go around right now and introduce ourselves. My name is Luke Davis. I am presently serving as the Bible Department Chairman at Westminster Christian Academy in St. Louis, Missouri. And I've been there, this is my 13th year, and I teach primarily ethics and church history as well as some administrative details. And this past May, Christian Focus published a book of mine, which is called Tough Issues, True Hopes, Concise Journey Through Christian Ethics. And I'm married to my wife, Christy. We have 3 children. We have Joshua, who is 22 and lives with us. Lindsay is 19. She's out of the house. And Jordan has been with the Lord since 2008. So that's me, and I'm just going to circulate around and allow our other panelists to introduce themselves.
Rachel, I think you should go first.
Exactly. Oh, okay. Hi. So my name's Rachel Lane. I live in Hastings in the UK. I'm married to Martin, who is a vicar, a minister of a church down here. Before we had children, I was a teacher of English to children at a secondary school level. So that's about 11 all the way through to 18. We now have 4 children of our own who the eldest is 13 and the youngest is 6. So we're very much at the beginning of this journey of parenting teenagers, and we're looking to quite a few years ahead. But I've recently had the opportunity to write a book for Christian Focus about my own experience as a teenager. They were very difficult years for me, and I struggled a lot with anxiety and depression. So the book that I've written is called Why Do I Feel Like This? Meeting God in the Emptiness, and with sharing my own experience, hoping to get alongside young people and point them to Christ in their own struggles. Thanks.
Hi, my name is John Kwasny. I'm Director of Discipleship Ministries at Pear Orchard Presbyterian Church in Jackson, Mississippi in the U.S. I'm also a biblical counselor for the last 30 years. I'm also Director of One Story Ministries. We provide curriculum for children, youth, and in church, home, and school. My wife, Marty, and I have been married almost 30 years, and we have 8 children. I'm not going to tell you all their names because I don't remember most of them. But we have 3 teenagers now, 3 who are married, and 1 grandchild with 2 on the way. Christian Focus has graciously published my book last year called Pursuing a Heart of Wisdom, counseling teenagers biblically, top 20 issues that teenagers face.
Well, my name's Jim Turrent. John, you're very blessed with the children you have. God's waited 14 years before he gave us our son, Alistair, and he's so precious to us. And although I'm probably a bit older, he is 16, coming up on 17 now. And I'm married to Janie, and I'm pastor of Central Baptist Church in Dundee, which is a city centre church with a gathered congregation and a real passion for discipleship and church planting and things like that. And we've got a really exciting, God willing, project coming up to become a training hub for pastors and Christian workers over the next 6 to 8 months and into the future.
Okay. And your book was published through Christian Focus also, Jim?
Yeah. Crucial Clarity. Yeah, I can speak a bit about that later, but yeah, it's published through Christian Focus. So no, I used to be a pastor in a church in Inverness in Culloden. It's a very famous place, battle-wise. And I really got to know the Christian Focus people up there, and I'm just so impressed by them. And so I kept that connection, and that's the connection that resulted in the publication of the book.
Great. Well, we're going to fire right in. Before that, we've just got a few housekeeping details. Tonight, we're going to be giving away bundles of our books by all 4 of our panelists. So if we could hold those up right now so people can realize these are actual things they'll be getting. There we go. I'll be announcing one winner about 15 to 20 minutes in, and then we'll have 2 additional winners at the end of our event. The winners are going to be selected from individuals who post comments or ask questions on Facebook or YouTube. Also, we'd like to mention our retail partners who we're advertising with right now. Cumberland Valley Bible Book Service in the U.S. out of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, cvbbs.com. And if you're in the U.K., you can go to Revive. Make sure you've got the hyphen in there. That's kind of key, revive.com. And the links to both of those websites should be in the comments, both on Facebook and YouTube. So we're gonna, as I said, we're just gonna dive right in and see where this takes us. And we had some questions generated ahead of time, and some are going to be popping up over our time together. But I just want to lead with this. One of the things that was brought up previous to our coming together was the question: kids and especially teenagers go through these adolescent traits, and they go through phases of non-communication. They have irritability, and we know this because when we were teenagers, we likely went through these moments at well. When did those times become more than teenage phases? When do they move into the area of significant concern, even mental health concern, especially at a time where in COVID, we're more attuned probably to mental health and stress than ever before. So I'll just pose that, and we can just kind of run with it now.
Yeah, I think that is quite a difficult question because I'm sure we all agree that there's a lot of overlap. It's not black and white, is it? And certainly there are a lot of behaviours that might be fairly typical of teenagers, being moody, being withdrawn, having those emotional ups and downs. Mm-hmm. And I suppose there are some kind of signals that there might be a bit more going on in terms of having a prolonged low mood, rather than going up and down. Just if when your teenager seems to be down for a long time, maybe withdrawing from their peer group as well, because that's less common. If they're withdrawing from things they used to enjoy, staying home, not connecting with friends, That's certainly something that would be a cause for concern for me. And then, the classic things like disrupted sleep, struggling to sleep, struggling with appetite. And probably most of us know that teenagers tend to eat quite a lot. So I'd notice under eating first, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know about the rest of the panel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with all of what Rachel says. I think what this question highlights is the need for parents to be in tune to where their teenagers are. There's just too often the temptation for myself is included is to write most things off as that's just being a teenager. That's just a phase. That's just a stage and they'll get over it. And while that can be true at times, I think it behooves us to give them the attention they require, both in teaching, training, listening. My wife is a whole lot better than I am of just listening to their heart, giving them time, letting them talk. Even our non-communicative boys who don't talk as much, we'll talk a lot more to them, to my wife, if given the chance and opportunity. So I think this, everything is on a spectrum, right? Our sin and our problems and our difficulties and our struggles and our sufferings all go on from, minor blips all the way to chronic, issues that are tough to conquer. And so all the things Rachel said, I totally agree. And just parents just, I think, we're in an interesting stage of parenting where some parents are a little over, helicopter parenting sort of things, but I still think a lot of us don't pay enough attention to the things that are really important. And their behaviors, moods, their isolation, their social media, all those sorts of things are very important today to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think teenagers, looking back to my own teenage phase, we're pushing the envelope, aren't we? We're testing the barriers. We're doing all these things. I think from my point of view, and people listening, you have to know that in the sort of pre-live stream interaction between us all, we're no gurus who have all the answers here. We certainly are not. But I think what I try to do anyway is to make sure that my boy knows that I love him. That is something that they probably think is, I don't want to hear that, but they really do. I think they really do. That whatever he is to me in terms of behavior or moods or everything that's going on, that I'll be there for him. First and last, I'll be there for him. He's mine and I'll be there for him and I love him. And I think it's important that teenagers hear that, even though they may say to you that they don't want to hear it. I know that looking back, I did want to hear that from my parents, even though I didn't, if that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I probably should have led with that going into these questions is sort of the group confession that we're not experts, that we're all just sort of making our way in the ravine while rocks are whizzing around our heads and just laying that out on the table. So Jim, thanks for informing Christian Focused Universe about that. But just piggybacking on what everyone said, I think that one of the important things, at least in my own experience, is not just listening to your kids and just being there, but also with your spouse, because husband and wife will view and deal with and hone in on things differently. And one might say this is a problem, one might say it's a phase, and then in another situation it might flip, vice versa. It's an issue that you at least have to be open to each other, and not discount what your spouse is saying. Which really underscores, I think, that the health of the marriage relationship really plays a lot into the response to teenage phases, whether they're mental health concerns. And Jim, you're also exactly right in terms of being able to hear that we love them and telling them that often. The first school headmaster I worked for, Mickey Bowden, he always was fond of saying that in a school environment, in a teaching environment, every one of our students is coming into the classroom and they have two implicit questions. Do you love me, and can I trust you? And all our kids, especially our teenagers, have those same implicit questions. Sometimes they get explicit at very zany moments, but it's the same. And bringing forth an atmosphere of love and trust is absolutely critical. Shifting gears, this is more to the faith and outworking of it realm. What do we as parents do, especially from a Christian point of view, if our teenage child is exhibiting just this total pushback, or even leaving the Christian faith, they want nothing to do with it, and this can take a variety of forms, maybe no interest in going to church, singing the worship music, no interest in praying, or it can just be a really almost vile attack against the parents and their beliefs. So I guess the question is, how do we embrace our children in those moments of such hardship, when we're getting hit with all of that?
Well, I'll start by saying that I was one of those kids. I was the teenager that my parents made me go to church, and I refused to get out of the car on Sunday mornings for about a year. I brought the Sunday newspaper with me and sat in the car, very hot car, as I remember, for the whole worship service and Sunday school. I don't know how they let me get away with that, but thankfully, through a lot of love and grace and prayer, I actually enjoy going to church and love to worship God now. So part of it on parents is patience, is showing a lot of grace. We get impatient with our teenagers, especially on something that's significant, right? We're talking about their eternal soul. We're talking about life and death. And so that can raise our anxiety and impatience to a level that does not trust the Lord. So a lot of prayer, a lot of patience, but I think also we do the things depending on their age. Dealing with a 13-year-old on that issue is different than dealing with a 17-year-old, right? Mm-hmm. The younger teenagers, we might be able to say, no, you know what? You're going to church, even if you sit there and close your eyes and pretend to sleep the whole time. A 17-year-old who refuses to leave the house with you on Sunday mornings, that's a tougher issue. That's a tougher issue that there are going to be times you're going to say, okay, son, we can't force you, but we want you there. And every Sunday we're going to wake you up and we're going to try to get you to go to church with us. And then others of you can speak to what happens when they're totally rejecting the faith as well. But that's kind of where I come from on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that I was that teenager as well. And it does seem like some of us will just go through that prodigal time and need to kind of test our independence by, I think it's part of rejecting your parents as well in some way. It's if you're brought up in a Christian family, it's kind of rejecting everything that they stand for. And I certainly had this kind of reckless desire to just try everything they told me was bad, and just really find my own way. And I guess many of us would say that it wasn't until we did that and found that just didn't work out too well, that then we came back in our own time. So I think not panicking and being patient, as John said, praying, and also joining together with others in prayer. I remember being aware one day that my godmother had visited during a very rebellious time in my life and prayed with my mom. I knew they were praying about me. I always registered that and remembered it, even if I didn't really understand it at the time. It obviously meant something to me. So those are my thoughts. I don't know. Over to Jim.
Thanks, Rachel. I mean, two things from me, just reaching back into my own experience. I would say certain people, apart from my parents, and my parents are godly people, but people in the church apart from my parents who really took an interest in me. There was one particular gentleman who saw that there was a group of us boys who were just sitting at the back of the church, just making a nuisance of ourselves every Sunday, totally disinterested, and thought, you know, I got to do something about these guys. Now, the fact that he had 4 girls of his own, he was probably desperate for some male company. So, you know, he took us in hand, and he did so much with us, and we absolutely adored him. And I think, you know, if there are people in church who just have a real heart for teenagers, relish them. But I think the other thing is, you know, it's an unrestrained commitment to the sovereignty of God in this. You know, I know, was it John or Rachel? I can't remember who mentioned prayer there. I mean, it really is. When it comes to that, you know, we can't arm wrestle them into doing anything really. It has to be, you know, an Ephesians 2 moment where the Holy Spirit awakens them to the beauty of Christ, and we see, and they see it for themselves, and it's not an inherited thing. And so yeah, these two things. I mean, just leaning on people. God is so wise in that he puts us not only in physical families, but also in the spiritual and physical family of the church for very good reasons, because there you share gifts. And, you know, it's a number of years now since my son has laughed at any of my jokes. But there are people in church whose jokes he would laugh at. So,
I can't speak to any rebellious moments of my own against the faith growing up. I mean, probably most of my questions cropped up during my seminary years of all times. I mean, that was just a weird phase. And I mean, seminary can ruin you in some ways. But I think in terms of dealing with any sort of pushback or just a sense of darkness of the soul. One of the challenges that I think we four can at least say, just because we are all, whether in the pastoral ministry or in the teaching ministry of sorts, we are used to having a sort of control of the steering wheel, and we're used to communicating the gospel and communicating biblical truth. And we can sort of kind of trick ourselves into thinking, well, if I just put it out there in waves, eventually it'll click, and it just doesn't work that way. And then you start to get distressed, and you wonder, is anything I'm going to say make a difference? All my planning and all that. And what's helped me a lot is going back to Jesus's words to the disciples, when he said, when you are called to account and you need to speak, don't worry about what you're going to say, for you will be given the words in that moment. And which really brought on a very surreal moment when it was well after we lost our youngest child, and both of our surviving children, Joshua and Lindsay, dealt with that in different ways. But I do remember one time when one of them asked, you know, where was God when Jordan died? And I mean, I just really froze. And then the next thing I knew, there was a voice, and it was my voice, strangely enough, saying something along the lines of, I don't know, but I do know that when Jordan died, the first person who cried was God, because he knows what it's like to lose a son. And then I just remember it was Lindsay just kind of sitting there, and she's like, and you just saw in her eyes, wow, that actually makes sense. And it was just a really bizarre moment. But I think in terms of being willing to be a vessel of what God can speak through you, rather than thinking we have to manufacture it on our own. And really that takes a lot of the pressure off, but we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves. Looking at other questions, we've got some coming in from online. One question is, what ways can we help our teenagers to open up to us as their parents? So that, I guess the idea is maybe they're clams, and we have to either, do we crack them open? Do we gently pry them? How do we help them open up to us and encourage them to do that? I'm not going to lead on that one. It's going to have to be with you three.
One thing that just had come into my mind just before this was how helpful things like car journeys can be. And maybe that's because of the fact there isn't any eye contact. Sometimes on a long, especially a longish car journey, if it's just me and my son, or just my husband and my son, he will will cover a lot more ground than we would do if we tried to sit him down at home across a table and have a serious talk. And I think similarly, sometimes just getting out of that home environment, doing something different, trying to invest in some one-on-one time, particularly if you have a bigger family like ours. Our children, admittedly, that most of them aren't teenagers yet, but they really enjoy spending one-on-one time with myself and my husband, because they don't get that very often, and normally they're having to compete for attention. So I think maybe being creative and just trying to seek those opportunities to connect in a different context.
Yeah, I've always found the informal times a lot better than the formal times. Formal times, I do a lot of talking. Informal times, they do more talking. And so times, making yourself present with your kids, just with your teens, especially if it's just hanging out, watching a show, or doing an activity together, or riding the car, being present enough for conversation to turn and get to places where it starts to get into their heart a little bit more. For a lot of teens, though, the only time they're really going to share is when there's crisis. And so sometimes you're waiting for the next crisis, which is not always fun, to wait for that next time when there's going to be a meltdown, or something's going to happen in school, or something's going to happen to friends or church or whatever. But those are also times to get them to open up. We could talk about the differences between girls and boys. I've got 5 girls and 3 boys. The 5 girls were totally different than these 3 boys I have on the end. My boys seem to talk to me more by text now than personal conversation, at least in the heart level. They'll let me say things to them. Again, kind of like the no eye contact thing. Teenagers today can put things down in text that they're willing for you to text back and say something very clear to them to target their heart. So those are just some of the ways that come to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to the foregoing from Rachel and from John. I think that's excellent. I just think having the discipline to wait until the moment and not press the issue, because as parents, we love them so much. We want to sort things now. And that's a discipline, especially as they grow older, that you've just got to wait the moment.
Sure. And tagging in on that, I've always been amazed that how the marriage sets the tone, or how kids, especially teens, will open up. I really felt a lot more freedom to go to my parents about a lot of things, because I knew, whether it was from an internal sense or something that was exemplified openly, that they were just very open and honest with each other. And so if you see that, especially as a teenager in your parents' relationship, that can be a great encouragement in the acceptance that you're going to feel going to mom or dad about something. We tend to think that so much of our activity as parents can often be reactionary. And of course, during the teenage years, that feels like it a lot of times. But there's a great deal of proactivity of having a soundness in marriage between husband and wife that really spills over and then the teenager sees that and they're like, well, if they have that together, I can have that on my own level with them as well. So we're going on. Let's go to another question here. This is regarding social media, and this was a big deal even before COVID. It's becoming more of an issue during COVID with lockdowns and everybody shut in. How should a parent of teenagers protect them, their children, from the pitfalls of the internet and social media without becoming invasive and controlling? So protection, but a sense of freedom as well. How do we keep that balance?
I think it's about training them to deal with things that in our youth we didn't have to deal with. And it's a new world for them, and it's trying to understand that. The two words that come to mind for me are ask and trust. Mm-hmm. Ask them what they're watching, and imbue them with an element of trust in it, because at some point they're going to have to walk on their own. And I think that's what I try to do, just periodically, just say, well, what are you watching? Why are you watching it? And obviously we do have controls, internet controls and that sort of thing that we put on. But I think that we have to, when they get into their older teenage years, we have to give them an element of trust as well, because at some point they're going to have to exercise that for themselves, that restraint for themselves, when they go beyond the family home boundaries. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, the first word that jumped in my mind was the same one: training and equipping our kids. There was a time that we thought of social media and the internet and everything and technology in ways of just restriction, right? To put up the barriers, put up the blockades. You can't be on it. You can't have it till you're this old. Those times are gone, really. And when a parent finds themselves in this kind of ping pong, locking down restrictions and then giving freedom, and then they find out they're doing something, they take the phone away and they take it away, and then they go back and forth. It's not a good recipe for growth and maturity. What these kids need, teenagers need today, is this is their life. This is the way they communicate. This is the way they relate to friends. This is the way they gain knowledge. This is the way they entertain themselves. And to a lot of us old folks like me, a lot of it seems stupid, if I can say that. It seems silly, and yet that's their life. And acknowledging it, understanding it, and not just getting in the restrictive mode, but going to the equipping, the training, the talking, the discipling, the keeping some level of accountability by asking them, and ultimately teaching them about an all-knowing and all-seeing God who loves them, but is also there to be glorified, and if they're professing believers, for them to watch over you.
I don't have anything particularly to add. I think that's all really helpful, and we're just at the beginning of that stage, really. But it definitely is challenging to me to think about what kind of role model I am, particularly with my phone. And just like the young people, I found that more of a battle during lockdown. So yeah, sometimes I find it very convicting to think that my daughters, for instance, who don't yet have a phone, and their model of what that looks like is me. You know, when I'm waking up first thing in the morning and reaching for it, and they're trying to speak to me, and I'm more interested in my device. You know, that gives out a strong message, and something that sometimes we have to look at ourselves first.
Right. Yeah, so that's a great point. Is they're going to take their cue from the modeling that their parents do, and if we're tied to our devices, which we need, you can't navigate through life as it is right now. The idea of going through it without access to the internet or having a cell phone incredibly difficult. So none of us is advocating that we become Luddites all of a sudden and go off the grid. But if we have to be able to show that we can set our own boundaries and hold to them. When our phone buzzes, we're not always reaching towards it. That we can say no. That set aside. Mm-hmm. We can display discipline there, and the truth is, I mean, this is their life. The super majority of teenagers have grown up totally after 9/11, and it's been a new world since then. And when my students hear me say that I graduated from high school before Google, they look at me like I've got three heads. They don't know that was even possible. That's we can either wall up against them, or we can surf with the way that the waters are going, but also to show how the training and the asking and the trusting all need to be there. We're a little bit further in than we had planned before announcing the first winner, but we do have our first winner of our book bundle. It is Christina McMillan. So congratulations, Christina. Christian Focus will be sending our bundle of 4 books your way. We've also got another online question that's come across my phone here. This is posed regarding teens who may feel some isolation. How do we guide and encourage our teenagers when there are no other teenagers in their church or community for them to relate to and learn from? Not necessarily where there are others and they're withdrawn from them, but where the possibilities just aren't there. And this individual also appends this. I used to run youth camps, and so many teenagers felt isolated and unheard by the older members in their church. So they didn't have much of an avenue for younger kids. The next step is, well, I'd like to latch onto the older members, and then they feel like that's cut off too. So how do we encourage them in those scenarios?
Well, I'll start by saying that's a huge question. It's very personal question for us, that we've had several kids go through their time in youth group, and even though they were teenagers their age, still feel very isolated, no friends, nobody related to them. Trying to train them how to be a friend proactively instead of waiting to be friended is part of it. But yeah, when you're even more isolated, when there's not even an opportunity, that's really that's a struggle. I mean, because we're all there and God has designed us for relationships, and just being able to grieve with your teenager and relate to him and say, that's hard and that's terribly hard, but God is sovereign. and he's got a plan for you in relationships. He's not leaving you alone. He's not leaving you. You have family, you have other relationships. We need to pray. We need to pray for new opportunities. And it saddens me to hear the rest of the question when there aren't older adults, because that's where we have pointed some of our teenagers. Like there are other young adults and even older adults that enjoy talking to you. And for my son, enjoy even working out at the gym, at the same gym you work out at, and you can chat about things, and so we do need to be careful as parents and as adults that we're not thinking all the relationships our kids need are their same ages, right? That teenagers just need other teenagers. They need younger kids to mentor. They need older kids and older adults to relate to and to grow up with, and to be mentored by, to not be alone. And this time of COVID's been rough all the way around for many of them. And so again, I think as parents that see our teenagers going through that, there's a time that you just simply need to grieve with them and be with them in the struggle. It's tough.
I think what John says is really wise there. I mean, I reach back to my own experience of, coming to faith in Christ when I was 11 years of age, but then just really drifting through those years in many ways, and then recommitting my life to Christ when I was 17. And at that stage, it was quite a lonely phase for me because there was a transition in friendships. I'd kind of neglected Christian friendships in some ways. And but I look back on that now, and I can remember very low moments during that time. But our God is the redeeming God who redeems not only people but circumstances. And I think we want to make everything okay for our kids, don't we? We just naturally want them to be happy, but sometimes they've got to go through stuff, like we went through stuff. And there is nothing wasted in God's economy. And I look back on these times when I really felt lonely at some points. But somehow in it, because the Holy Spirit was working in me, it took me to Christ. And so, I don't want to, it's, God uses these times as well. And I think if we can have the discipline as parents to think, God is sovereign in this, He is working through this. And even the bad stuff that we want to sort for them right now may not be the best thing in the long term for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it can be a very lonely time of life to be a Christian. Obviously, lots of young people who are in school, they may be the only Christian they know, sitting in religious education, squirming. And I would say our son he's the only child in our church of that age group, so he's going through a very similar struggle, and he seems to cope well and knows that the expectation is that he still comes. We have tried to arrange for him to read the Bible one-to-one with a youngish man in the church. I mean, they don't, like you said, John, they don't have to be young, but in this case, just a bit younger and probably cooler than we are. That helps. And my daughter's had the same experience, and I think that's great for them to develop that relationship with another adult who isn't you. And I think in our church, perhaps we're blessed that people genuinely do seem to care about the children, and that's something we should be praying and hoping to see in our churches, that kind of intergenerational dependency. And the other thing that just came to mind was that when I was young, my parents did let me go to a different church for a while when there were no young people, and I found a friend at school who went to a different church where there was a buzzing youth group, and rather than see me disappear off the scene completely, they were willing to let me try that. But that's probably not for everybody. It's just having that kind of flexibility, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But I think that is true, that as parents, sometimes we think if they're not getting this through what we view as the tried and true ways, then sometimes we default to thinking, well, we just need to push them harder in those same ways. But being open to the flexibility, like what you talked about, Rachel, a different environment might be just the thing. And I think what this shows is that by virtue of the fact that we as parents, if we're reacting compassionately towards the isolation that our teenagers might feel, that's an indicator that this is, isolation is not the way that God, called us to live. I mean, during the time of creation, he says about Adam, it is not good that man be alone. We are made to be in companionship and in connection with one another, and to do that and to do that well. So yeah, I think that, and also to encourage our teenagers that, so sometimes when they're going through a trial, in this case, sensing that they can't connect with anyone, that they start to think, I'm the only one in the world who's going through this. That this is all me, and the layers just keep overlapping. And to encourage them, and sometimes they're not going to come out of that until they connect with someone else, but to walk alongside of them, at least until they do. And very often, I think what they'll find is the connection they might have eventually is with someone who was struggling with that same issue and needed a friend like them. And it's really great how God sometimes, and this is always in his wisdom, lines up those opportunities. The questions keep coming in from online. This one, what happens if, as a parent, you aren't sure that they love you? For example, in a blended family, adopted, if the child is fostered. So this would be, I guess, what I'm reading from the question. The child isn't sure that you love them. So this can be a variety of different reasons or scenarios, and also, families with multiple kids. Sometimes they kids will be, oh, you love so-and-so more than you love me. You listen to, my brother or my sister more compassionately than me. What happens, as we face those moments? What's in our toolbox as parents as we face those situations? And I'm sure we've all faced them. So this is not, we're not ignorant of these times.
So the question has to do with if our teenagers don't feel loved by us.
Right, for whatever reason. Yeah.
Well, I would start by saying, there's some validity always to us looking at ourselves as parents and saying, what am I doing? Are most of the things coming out of my mouth criticisms and commands, versus expressions of love and care and compassion? So I if we can balance the criticism and commands with some real compassion and loving things that we say, instead of just think about our kids, the first stop is certainly us. We should take a hard look at our own selves with that. But we also have to recognize the heart of our teenagers and our children, can be bent towards, self-pity, can be bent towards self-absorption of, again, some of those statements you said, Luke, like you play favorites, you like them, you don't like me. I've had with 8 kids, you have some kind of every problem. But I love you kids if you're watching. Because they all struggle, it's easy for them to say that they're the black sheep, they're the oddball, they're they're again the ones I hear from some of my kids. You're always disappointed in me. You're always disappointed in me. I'm not, I'm not the child you want, and those sorts of things. So, as much as you have to watch yourself, parents, be careful that you're not falling for some level of manipulation that is born out of self-pity that makes you overreact to maybe pour it on to a child and attention to a child, and whether you have one child or many, that can be an empty hole if you're just about pouring your attention and time and energy in, just because you think they'll know you love them. If that's a lot of different directions, but you guys tie it together for me. I know you're thinking about it.
I think in our family, we certainly get a lot of accusations of being unfair, and you can't win, really. I try to explain that it's never going to be completely fair. We can't make sure the experience for each child is identical. And of course, they seem to have this kind of encyclopedic memory of everything that you've ever done or given to another child, or exactly what their bedtime was at this particular age. So
I'm not the only one who experiences that.
Amen, sister. Preach it. Yeah.
Preach it.
There's a book. It's not a Christian book, but there is a book called sibling rivalry, I can't remember what it's called actually, so that's not a good advertisement, but I think it kind of sweeps away this idea of being fair. Just don't try and play that game, because you can't make it fair for each child. So like John said, examining your heart and making sure that you're showing love. If you're struggling to feel love, asking God to give you that love, but trying to play the game of giving everyone the exact same experience is it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I would say that on this one, I just want to give way to my more esteemed and learned colleagues in this. Who
are they? Are they here?
Siblings without rivalry.
Well, one of I think another thing we're fighting against there, even if there's not a sense of comparison with other siblings. So many teenagers, and I see it as a teacher with my students in a very driven environment of get into the right college, get the right job, get the most money and everything. It's all there. So I know I'm going public about that, but I don't see how that's different from a lot of other schools. But it's just such a performance-driven mindset, and that enters into the family relationship, and teenagers will adopt that, sometimes without knowing it, and then by the time it erupts, they are neck deep in it. And it is such a liberating message for them to hear, when because so much of what they sense should be love coming from us, and they sense they're not feeling it, they may feel like they haven't done something to earn that love. And as parents, we don't want our kids, especially our teenagers, living in that territory. One of my favorite authors of all time is Pat Conroy, and I've read so many of his novels. And one of the last ones that he wrote towards the end of his life was South of Broad. And there's a scene towards the end where the main character, his mom and dad, are having sort of an argument or a very tense discussion. And the mother's very exacting, and she said, to the father, you have to admit he hasn't been a perfect child. And the father says, I never wanted a perfect child. A human child was always good enough for me. And those kudos to Pat Conroy, but I was able to take that into a conversation with one of our children when they expressed in their teenage years, I just don't feel like I'm good enough. And so of course, what's behind that is I haven't achieved enough perfection to be loved by you, or to have a sense of tenderness at least coming from you. And I told them, I never wanted a perfect child. A human child's good enough for me. And that just has a sense, I think, of bleeding off the pressure when if they understand that they are accepted completely, just as they are. In fact, in spite of whom they are, that's really what makes grace, the grace of Christ, so amazing for us, is that we're loved in spite of who we are. That's a very revolutionary moment for them, and I think the more we put that message out there, the better it is. We keep moving on. Maybe a couple more questions. This one with the gender identity crisis, if we can put that in air quotes or inverted commas, if you're across the pond, so much in the media and on the education agenda. How can we help our teenagers go through adolescence? And this is a time of great upheaval, physical, social, emotional change. How do we shepherd them through those times and enter into their adulthood secure in their physical identity, their gender identity, and in their God-given image? So this is kind of a cultural question. How do we survive the plunge over that waterfall with them?
Yeah, I think in this, it's something that I've thought quite a lot about. That there is there is a sanity in Scripture. There is a truthfulness there. There is a rootedness there. That as we teach them, as they grow, that they imbibe. And that's not to downplay in any way the pervasive agenda of a culture that is determined to just be more and more progressive all the time, which is actually regressive in my view. But I think as well, one of the key things that appeals to a younger generation, and it's one of the strange things, that probably the rising generation is in a sense more morally attuned than previous generations, our generation, the 60s generation in my case, and so you've got a bit of an in there that they are more attuned to it. And so I think use the receptivity of people who will respond to a message like the respect that should be shown to all people, no matter who they are, as those who are made in the image of God and have an inherent value thereby. I think that's got great credibility in our culture. And I think that's something that we need to sound a bit more, rather than being defensive about people. So when same-sex attracted people come into Central Baptist Dundee, we treat them like people.
Mm-hmm.
We accept them as people who are made in the image of God and have an inherent value thereby. And I think I'm quite, in some ways, I'm more optimistic for the rising generation, because I think they've seen it all, done it all, and pray God that they're looking for a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah, I echo Jim. I'm glad to hear that, because I tend to see this whole time of gender identity, sexual identity, as an opportunity with our teens to just talk about identity. If you're going to raise the question of who am I, right? And, gender identity has brought in whole new, thinking that somehow we can decide for ourselves what our gender is. But really, that's the universal struggle of the human soul. Who am I? And we get to answer that question. It's not about sex, gender. It's not about, relationship. It's not about other people. Those all become idols of the heart for us. It's about Christ and Christ alone. Either you're going to find your identity in Christ or you're going to find it somewhere else. And you can idolize heterosexuality as much as homosexuality. You can wreck everything. I think unfortunately we Christians, that the whole gender thing kind of snuck up on us, and we kind of got behind it, behind in our thinking, and then maybe overreactive at some places. But I think again, when you are grounded in Scripture, and you're grounded in made in the image of God, and you're grounded in where is your identity, those conversations can come very easily with teenagers who want to understand that. But if you come out just harshly judgmental against all people that are struggling or are sinning, quite honestly, or are just in a tough place, they're not going to listen to you. But again, we can't go to the other extreme and just have this open-handed tolerance, that is an unbiblical tolerance in any way at all. But be proactive and be positive about the opportunity you have to talk about identity in Christ.
Rachel, what your thoughts on the matter of shepherding them through, and questions about gender identity and everything else, and being in God's image?
I think the thoughts that have been shared already are really, really helpful. And I suppose just an obvious thing, but to add to that, is just having positive role models in terms of gender, in terms of men and women, and discarding what's unhelpful about male and female stereotypes. So it's great for our children to know there's a variety of women, single, married, in the kitchen, in a business suit. I don't think that we want to kind of keep hold of things that are unhelpful in terms of gender stereotypes, but give them positive role models of men and women that are equal but different.
Yeah. A couple things that came to mind on that question. First of all, I think eventually there's a tether to the whole gender identity crisis that will eventually snap back into a greater area of, shall we say, sanity. And maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I don't think in a social context that you can keep that going with any amount of petrol in the tank, so to speak. Now, that being said, as we engage with our teenagers over questions like these, and just with people at large, like what Jim, what you were talking about at Central Baptist in Dundee, how you do that on a church-wide and pastoral level. We're not going to gain any credibility by throwing bombs and by denouncing the nonstop negativity and showing all the problems. But if we, as parents and as Christian believers, display a godly biblical lifestyle of what gender and sexuality and relationships are supposed to be like, then it's going to be so warm and inviting and beautiful that the idea is people can't help but be attracted to that model. And so I think that goes for the church at large. It definitely goes for our teenage children. One more item as we're kind of moving through this is we've got varying degrees of experience here. We can speak to all sorts of issues and slip-ups that we've had and everything. But as we're sort of looking back on our time here, and as we're looking back on our as we've tried to nurture our children as we have, and as we're going to in the teenage years, if you could if you could put into just a few sentences sort of your takeaways of what it means to parent teenagers as a Christian, you can say bullet points or tagline or whatever. What would you distill parenting teens down into personally?
I think just being clear that I'm a sinner parenting sinners, and I know that I'm stealing this from somebody else, but that we're more similar than we are different. Sometimes, you know, a teenager might feel like a different species, but actually we've got a lot more in common than we have differences, and that getting alongside them and identifying with them as someone who faces the same struggles and battles still, I think is really important.
I'm totally with Rachel there. I think when they get into their teenage years, they suddenly realize that their parents are not Superman or Superwoman, and that we are flawed characters ourselves. And I think going to your children and saying, look, I got that wrong, I'm sorry, is it can be a very healing thing. And I've had to do that, and I know other parents have as well. And it's just part of the teaching process. But I think love and listen are the two words. And just be there, you know, because I mean, we love our children more than they will ever realize until they themselves are parents. And so, yeah, love and listen.
The two things I would say is remember, parenting teenagers and parenting in general is for your sanctification as well. It's for you to become more humbled, more dependent, more Christ-like, more holy. It's for you as much as for them. And then second, I'd say of all the goals parents have for children, whether it's college and career and sports teams and great grades and all that, that really our greatest goal is for them to know Christ and to have a heart of wisdom. And if those goals, if that goal is achieved, all the other ones are just nice and lagniappe, as we say down here in the South.
Yeah. John, your first comment there reminded me of St. John Chrysostom about pastoring, where he said, my job is like that of a man cleaning a patch of muddy ground into which a dirty stream is constantly running. There's a lot of overlap just to the art and science and everything of parenting. For me, it just in thinking through that, because I kind of asked that question before I had an idea how I would answer it, so that's kind of dangerous. But parenting teenagers, it comes down to three things. We are all, they are, but we all are prone to wander. Just like the hymn, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing says, we're prone to leave the God we love, and to be prepared for that. Another thing too, my spiritual mentor from Virginia, Tom Foley, recently told me we're all prodigals. It's just the degree is different in every person, and that brings a lot of humility to the parenting process, especially for teens. And the last thing is something my rector shared with me from church just a few days ago, is that God loves prodigals. And to remember that, no matter what we do with our kids is going to blow hot and cold at times, but God is the constant, and Christ is the rock on whom they can always stumble and collapse, and He will catch them. And that's a really exciting and liberating thing to know that it truly doesn't depend on us. That can be frightening, but it's very healthy and helpful as well. Anyhow, we got notice about our second and third winners on the book bundles. Our second winner is, and I'm afraid of butchering this name, Sandy Asen. I believe it is Aasen. You're a second winner, so you'll be getting a bundle of our books from Christian Focus. And also Vivian, who posted via YouTube, you'll also be getting the third 4-pack that is coming everyone's way. So thank you both to our winners, everyone who has joined on this hour-plus long journey together. I just want to remind everybody about where to buy the books again, either Cumberland Valley Bible Book Service, again, at that website. Of course, these are in the comments also on YouTube and on Facebook Live, and Revive, again, remember the hyphen, .com for those who are in the UK. So John, Rachel, Jim, thanks so much for joining with me today for this very profitable, wide-ranging, but healthy discussion. And I just am very thankful for you all and for your wisdom supplementing my lack of it. So, but just want to thank you for your part in this journey, and God's blessings upon all of us as we seek to do his will. So thank you all so much. And we're going to begin the process of signing off now. But those of you who are still interested in this, our viewers, this will be continued. It will still be on Facebook.